So what we're really talking about here today is newcomers that are accompanied by their family. So recent arrivals to America that are not born in the USA. We're not actually, and that are accompanied by their family. We're not actually talking about unaccompanied minors. That would be a subject for a whole other workshop. So just to kind of just to give some definition there. So, oh, I already went through this. So a little bit about off to class. We are a curriculum assessment and professional development tool for English language learning teams, and we have about 950 ready to teach lessons on our site. So I'm going to show you some examples of some of the content that district teams use with their middle and high school newcomers throughout today's presentation. First off, so refugee and asylum seeker populations are increasing in the United States, especially you'll see the jump between 2020 and 2021. For a lot of us who are working in districts, this is not news to us. We do have kind of fluctuating enrollments coming into our programs. So realizing that the numbers of recent arrivals are going up, specifically speaking about refugees and asylum seekers that are coming into the US. And fascinatingly, when I was preparing for today's presentation, realizing that the distribution, so this graph is talking about total L's by state between 2001 and 2017, not just newcomers, but seeing that some of the biggest percentage changes are not in the states that we typically think of when we think of L populations, you know, kind of like your California, Texas, your New Yorks, but actually some of the biggest percent changes are in places like Arkansas, Mississippi, South Carolina, Kansas, North Dakota. So increasingly, the landscape of L populations is distributed across the country. And then thinking about the value that newcomers bring to society from a cultural perspective. This graph shows you the regions of origins of US refugee arrivals, and you're seeing that there's a huge split in diversity of the original, increasingly of the origination of these folks. So we have students coming from all sorts of linguistic and cultural backgrounds, and you know, I think one of the articles I read really put it very nicely that, you know, in schools, the very presence of immigrant students provides a huge, rich cultural opportunity for our students to expand their cultural knowledge and their capacity to participate fully in a multicultural democracy. So really recognizing that from a cultural perspective in our classrooms, but certainly in society at large, there's a huge opportunity with newcomers coming into the country. And then here we can see on the left that there's a big linguistic diversity when we think about immigrants in the United States. So of course, Spanish, we all know, is a large component of the linguistic backgrounds. But when we think about Chinese, Hindi, Filipino, Tagalog, Vietnamese, French, and 18% here says other, which means you have a huge diversity and linguistic diversity, also representing cultural diversity when we think about the cultural opportunity of newcomers bringing to society. And I could list cultural accomplishments of immigrants to the United States off here ad nauseum, but just some fun facts when I was preparing for today's presentation. In 2009, 8 of the 9 Nobel Prize winners in science were Americans, and 5 of those Americans were foreign-born. Foreign-born Americans won more Nobel Prizes that year than those won from all other nations combined. when you think about literature and music, when you think about some of your favorite authors, when you think about sports, culinary arts, and so many other sectors of the cultural landscape of the United States, there's a huge opportunity that newcomers bring to the table. And when we think about from an economic perspective, some of these statistics actually surprised me quite a bit. There is a humongous economic component to immigration in the United States. So 28% of all new US businesses are founded by immigrants, and they only represent about 12.9% of the US population. And in certain states, that stat increases immensely to the point where there's a 44.6% share of all new California businesses are founded by immigrants. Of course, a lot of us already know that new tech startups in Silicon Valley are disproportionately founded by immigrants, and that nationally, 40% of Fortune 500 companies were founded by either first or second generation immigrants. So there's a huge economic opportunity that newcomers bring to the country. And from a cultural and economic perspective, this is an opportunity that we really don't want to miss, that we really want to make sure that we're putting our best foot forward in being sure that we're able to tap into this opportunity. And of course, as all of us know, that the English language learner programs, English language learner teachers, those on the front lines are usually pivotal in extracting this opportunity for the rest of society. And so what I really want to spend the rest of today thinking about is how can we think about our curriculum? How can we think about our lesson content? How can we think about our instructional strategies to make sure that we are putting our best foot forward in developing the opportunities that newcomers bring to the country? So what I wanted to start is to think about the various personas that middle and high school newcomers take on in society. So thinking about the fact that there's different hats that newcomer students will wear when they're out in society, and there's different language that's needed depending on the hat that they're wearing at any given time. So thinking about newcomers as the family advocate, negotiating services and decision making on behalf of their family, thinking of a newcomer as a breadwinner. As we identified on some of those previous slides, newcomers are highly entrepreneurial, lots of business formation, realizing that newcomers, that middle and high school newcomers will often be considered adults in their home countries or in their home family environment. So realizing that these students are either in the workforce or are entrepreneurially minded or about to enter the workforce. Thinking about newcomers as caregivers, so negotiating the world of healthcare on behalf of their family, and thinking of newcomer high school and middle school students as a community link. So really, they might be the ones who are creating this whole new web of community connections on behalf of their family in their newfound home. So then thinking about really, given these different personas that a newcomer needs and the language that a newcomer might need to negotiate these personas, what does it really mean for instructional and curriculum strategy? Definitely a focus on lifelong English. So really thinking about the language skills that someone needs for kind of real life English, and realizing that that might not necessarily be our content class language and vocabulary. It's not to say that our newcomers don't need the language of algebra and social studies and science. It just means that they're also wearing a personas that definitely hinge on practical skills and being able to negotiate society in a practical manner. Realizing that age appropriateness is key. As I mentioned on the previous slide, that a lot of newcomers are considered adults in their home countries, and certainly at home and in their home communities. So realizing that age appropriateness is key, with a focus on goal orientation is always good. Realizing that a lot of our students are going to be quite beginner students, or kind of pre-intermediate students, where they're going to need to pick up some technical language skills, and they're going to need to focus on some kind of core technical language skills at that beginner and early intermediate level. And if we've got any administrators here today, I work with lots of administrators in districts across the country, and realizing that there's a unique challenge with the fact that middle and high school newcomers are involve fluctuating enrollments, that you can have students coming into your program at any time during the year, and that you need a quick way of being able to address those fluctuating enrollments. So again, I wanted to show you some examples of lessons on off to class, but I wanted to make this as practical as possible. So for anybody that showed up late today, these are examples of lessons on off to class. I'm going to go through them on my slides, but just reiterating that you can go set up free accounts and you'll have access to about 150 of these lessons. You can download, I think, about 30 to 40 different lessons off our website if you go to this lesson plan download area. And we even have a PowerPoint lesson plan template if you wanted to spend your Christmas break creating your own content. So in the on the theme of real life skills, of developing content that really focuses on job readiness, entrepreneurship, and other critical life skills, in our beginner curriculum at Off to Class, we have an entire unit on jobs and routines, really noting that that entrepreneurial mindset that a lot of our middle and high school newcomers are already ingrained with. You'll probably notice on our lessons that some of the folks are a little bit older in the pictures. That's really thinking about that idea of age appropriateness. This is the teacher notes that go along with this lesson. You'll notice that the unit really is talking about people and their jobs, but we try to also integrate, especially at the beginner and early intermediate level, a lot of those technical language skills that I mentioned, realizing that a lot of our middle and high school newcomers might have a low level of English, and being able to explain things from a technical standpoint is great, and blending it through a goal-oriented lesson can be really helpful. So just some ideas for when you go ahead and kind of create your own content, your own lesson plans, some different thematic ideas. This lesson focuses on all 4 skills. So there's listening, reading, speaking, and writing. Here, there's a lot of listening for specific information on this recording, being able to identify different jobs, being able to talk about them, about what each job entails. Again, just some ideas for building content. I think, using positive role models is always great for, people that might look like our newcomers. That might look like people that live in their home community or in their home country. I think is always a strong way to approach things. using a variety of different jobs. There's a good, and then this is the portion I mentioned around being able to work in with that vocabulary, some of those technical areas of the language, where we want some takeaways at the end of the lesson. Oh, sorry, 1 second. This is an example of a lesson from another unit in that scope and sequence, in that beginner scope and sequence, where we're actually drilling to say prices. So just again, another example, and you could think of so many great examples of content that really focuses on those ideas of real life skills, job readiness, entrepreneurship, critical life skills, just thinking about building content around the everyday needs that these students are going to have when they're out in their newfound home with wearing one of their hats, wearing one of their persona hats. So this is an example of a lesson from a unit about Let's Go Shopping. Obviously, for students that are playing that family advocate role, where they might be the link between the family and the outside community, providing some of those key links. Obviously, going shopping for the family is one of those key roles and key tasks, and being able to kind of foster some of that language, and being able to actually drill and teach the students how to work through pricing, how to work through, from a speaking and listening perspective, how to express pricing in English. This is just this is basically just an example of another kind of critical real life skills lesson. And the technical grammar point that's explored in this lesson is all about this, that, these, those, which actually is one of my favorite things to teach. Other lessons and content ideas at Off to Class, we have a big category of single skill speaking lessons. This one is about a visit to the doctor. So that again is an example of trying to hone in with your middle and high school English learners, thinking about the different personas that they might play, where they're going to need some of that critical language. One of the personas I identified up here was the caregiver. Some of your middle and high school newcomers might be negotiating healthcare on behalf of the family. Developing lesson content that gives them the skills to be able to negotiate a visit to the doctor could be a fantastic kind of single skill speaking activity that you could develop around that. This is an example of one of the speaking activities on Off to Class. It's about a visit to the doctor. We start off by exploring, some of the key language that you would need when you go see the doctor. And by the end of the lesson, we're basically providing some scaffolding where we're getting the student to use some of that target vocabulary and language in a conversation, in a free-flowing conversation. And the homework activities that are linked to a speaking activity like this, there's a speaking recorder where the student can practice on their own time and record themselves and deliver that back to you, which can be a great strategy for your own content building. Or we provide the option to the student to write. So just another idea of a goal-oriented lesson where you're trying to really hone in on the ideas of what are the personas that my students are needing to play, and what's achievable in one lesson. So that's really the idea of a single skill speaking lesson like this. This is an example of a business English lesson on Off to Class. Now, most folks that use our business English lessons, typically the use case would be kind of for community college or young adult programs, or we also work with a lot of adult programs. But recently, high school newcomers, teachers that we work with in different districts, they've been getting a lot of use out of some of these business English lessons, specifically because what we've noted when we've polled the teachers that are using them is that it really does foster that kind of idea of real life skills, and noting the that breadwinner persona that I was mentioning, and also noting the fact that newcomers are very entrepreneurial and very economic focused. And so just noting that the ability to create a CV, the ability to even understand what a cover letter is, all fantastic goal-oriented skills when you go and think about the type of content you want to be making for your newcomer lessons. This is the note I wanted to make on age. Did I stop sharing? Sorry about that. 1 second. There we go. This is just the note I wanted to make about age appropriateness. So the content that we're using for our middle and high school newcomers typically, or in many cases, depending on the students, our middle and high school newcomers are coming into our districts with quite a lot of life experience. A lot of growing up happening quite quickly in that typical life experience, and in their countries of origin, in their home communities, within their family units, they very well might be considered adults or young adults or almost adults. So some of those fun, awesome games and tools that we built for our elementary school students, they might not be the same tools and same kind of content themes that we use with our middle and high school newcomers. Just noting that a certain level of age appropriateness is always a good idea to think about when we're creating content for middle and high school newcomers. This is an example of a beginner lesson in our step-by-step curriculum. And I will just scroll over to the lesson now to show it to you. So this is the lesson library on Off to Class, and these are all the beginner curriculum lessons. And some of the units are quite basic. So they're starting with if I open up the first lesson in the sequence, the objective of this lesson is to use the verb to be. So like, I am Kris, in positive and negative. And so even though the technical area of the language is obviously very beginner, it's a great kind of like day one first lesson with a new cohort or a new group of students. But even though the language is quite basic and the objectives are quite basic from a technical perspective, you can see that we've still been able to incorporate kind of a good, solid, age-appropriate framework into some of the visuals and some of the audios that are being used. And just an idea, if you've been tasked to prepare content for middle and high school newcomers to keep that that alive in the idea of your own content, that age appropriateness is key, even if you might be exploring parts of the language that are at a beginner level. It can be, we've seen it quite a bit, that if you're teaching a student quite beginner parts of the language, like for example, the verb to be, you might, the resources that might be available to you might look a lot like this. And depending on your district profile and how the curriculum kind of in instructional strategies have been developed. So your content might look like this, but you want to think about steering your content that might look a little bit more like this. And then on that idea of beginner and early intermediate technical skills, think of when you're designing your own curriculum, think of a lot of the can-do outcomes that you're wanting to achieve. This is an example of the can-do statements from Off to Class, our beginner curriculum. So we're really talking about in that first lesson, learning the present simple, positive, negative, learning the present simple, positive, negative, throwing in a question form in there, learning basic greetings, learning the numbers 1 to 20, learning the alphabet, learning how to spell, learning some contractions, learning some adverbs of frequency, learning how to place an order for something. So really trying to get into some good, solid, technical kind of can-do outcomes when you're going ahead and designing your lesson plans and your curriculum for your own lessons. And the final point I wanted to talk about today was, this is really targeted towards any administrative folks that we might have here today. Of course, there's an administrative challenge when we have fluctuating student enrollments, both from a student and staffing perspective. Obviously, staffing issues, across districts across the country are challenging this year. But there's also the reality of students ending up in our programs at any time during the year is very much something we want to consider. What we would suggest is using an easy to deploy placement test to at least get some level of a barometer on the technical kind of ability and proficiency of your students when it comes to the English language. It can go a long way in clearing out some of that guesswork that might be needed on day one. So if you do have a placement test available to you, that can be a great starting point. And yeah, then it can go a long way to saving some time in figuring out what is the best curriculum and kind of intervention practice for this particular student. On Off to Class, the one I mentioned is there is a placement test, and this is an example of the results on the placement test. And this is a grammar proficiency level, but most importantly to the actual level, what I'm able to do after I assign this to a student, I might not know much about this student. This may be the student's first day in my classroom, but if I'm able to have the students sit this test, we produce something called the gap analysis, where we're able to outline different technical areas of our lesson library, different interventions that are linked to errors the student made on the placement test. So it can create a fantastic starting point for working with the student. As you're learning about the student, as you're taking time to learn about the different personas the student plays, the different needs the student plays from the needs the student has from different language and life skills they're trying to foster, you at least have a starting point here of different elements of the technical side of the language that the student needs help with. So on those free accounts that I mentioned at Off to Class, you're able to send the placement test 20 times. So that's why I wanted to just point it out that if you, most of the ideas I shared here today at off by giving off to class lessons as an example, you could take these ideas and build your own content. In the case of the placement test, it might be a little bit harder to build an adaptive placement test over your Christmas break. So if you did want to just leverage our free placement test, you can go to offtoclass.com and send it up to 20 times. So if you do get some fluctuating enrollments, some middle and high school newcomers coming into your classrooms next year, just know that this is available to you. And that is it for me today. Thank you so much for listening. And I suppose if there's a little bit of time left, we could